Hello again! I was hoping to do a video on the Oz conspiracy and their inspiration sources, or perhaps tap on one of my DC episode premises, but something has come up. A counter-essay, a retort, if you will, to my RWBY is Realistic video, written by someone who left a lot of comments on my Reddit post of the video before the page got mod-locked. I won't be responding to their comments as most of those were removed alongside mine with the mod's actions, but I will reference it at times, such as them claiming my video was in response to their essay, which is In truth, I didn't even remember their name before this, and their arguments are more or less part and parcel with most pro-Ironwood arguments, so who knows. Anyway, thanks as always to my wonderful backers for Patreon for supporting me, links below. So, in their opening summary, they claim my video twisted arguments of his community, classy, followed by asking, what is realism in fiction? They bring up my points about reality not being all bleakness, but claim I don't answer the question of what realism is in fiction, which is kind of true if one ignores the fact I use that to set up my final segment, tying Ironwood's actions to those of a real-life political figure. Still, I could have spent some time on the topic, but that felt more like a video essay unto itself. But let's see what they have to say on the matter. They say that as a genre, it's about stories that can take place in real life, but then also claim that it applies to fantastical or sci-fi settings that have stuff like veterans left to beg for food, such as Star Wars. This is inaccurate given the description of realism involves avoiding speculative fiction and supernatural elements, but I'm fine with us using a more colloquial definition if we must. They claim the more widely used term is whether a specific scene is realistic. To quote, for example, is it historically accurate that someone would wield two weapons? No. Is it realistic? Could it happen in real life? Can one actually do it? Yes. This feels a bit messy as an example, but it basically means that while something might be physically possible, it's not necessarily realistic due to the practical realities of doing such a thing. As for myself, I would call realism internal coherency within a setting's established rules, or elements that can be clearly analogous to real-life events which presumably still fit within the series' framework. But that's just me. They then complain about my presentation, saying it's bad faith because not all critics are monoliths, and supporting Ironwood's actions and hating that he is portrayed negatively doesn't make one an Ironwood stan. As it is, I don't recall accusing every critic of this, though I was broadly addressing common arguments, so the phrasing will naturally be quite encompassing, and on the latter, we'll just have to agree to disagree. Now, onto the actual rebuttal, i.e., Mantle having some forces there means Ironwood spared no expense in protecting Mantle, and his refusal to do more when disaster struck is unrealistic and bad writing. His language phrases that argument as almost universal among people who disagree with him. See how easy it is to use all-encompassing language? Then adds that the true argument has always been twofold, i.e., no one said Ironwood spared no expense, but that he obviously cared about Mantle because he sent some forces and Penny, disproving the idea that he didn't care at all. Followed by, if he was willing to give such minimal protection, why was he not willing to do more? How unrealistic. This rather ignores that Ironwood himself outlined why he was not doing so in the show itself after the dinner party was cancelled, i.e., he felt it would expose Atlas, the thing he actually cared about. After that, they reference Amity Arena and talk about how it indicates Mantle was meant to have turrets because it did in the game, which, seems like a reach to me and kind of off topic. They go on to say that RWBY is inconsistent because Ironwood cares and doesn't care about Mantle, and also didn't care about his reputation so long as he could continue to protect Mantle, which is, not what he said. Crow, your opposition in Mantle dropping dead isn't exactly a good look for you, huh? Ironwood, not really worried about my public image, but it is causing unrest. I think someone's trying to frame me, and by extension Atlas, and it's working. They then claim I am ignoring the show by claiming the soldiers and robots were there to oppress people, claiming it's perfectly fine for soldiers and robots to take on the role of police because they did technically, if poorly as highlighted in the show itself, defend Mantle at times, therefore it's all fine. This rather ignores my point that yes, they did protect Mantle, but that their primary function was suppression because that's the majority of what they were seen doing while only a handful were even stationed at the gaping hole in the wall. Also, Mantle already had police, and the drones invading people's space, yeah, that's totally protection. They say I dismiss Penny, which, yeah, I do, because tons of Grimm got into Mantle when she was actively defending it, attacking multiple areas at once, and she's not always there. As I said, Penny's strong and good, but she's not some magic cure-all. They then say I don't talk about why this is realistic or not, which rather ignores the fact my conclusion is where I tie all that up in a bow, but they acknowledge they make this mistake too. Section B, and I quote, Weiss could totally patch a single small, it wasn't small, hole in the wall because they only showed one so there can't possibly be any more, and ice would totally be effective against Grimm. They timestamped this point in the video for some reason, and I don't know why. They say not holding its viewers' hands is bad because it's vague and leaves the audience to create a story for themselves. I don't see how it's vague, and I would call the latter letting the audience reach its own conclusions based on what's presented. They do an aside, complaining about how they feel Aura was retconned from a passive shield to one that needed to be active, and claiming certain unnamed scenes make no sense if Aura must always be activated. This is in a bid to highlight that vagueness, but I feel that unnamed scenes are meaningless, and literally the first time Aura is brought up in the show, Pyrrha says, "Why didn't you activate your aura?" Complaint just, I guess. Their next complaint, RWBY don't show us other holes in the wall or verbally indicate such. I would note this wasn't even my main argument, and that I highlighted Grimm attacking areas of wall that have no holes but were also barely defended, and how there's still no anti-air Grimm defenses. They address none of these points, instead moving on to talk about the supplies that were taken by Ironwood from Mantle under false pretenses, and claiming that they couldn't be used to fix the wall, that it's a headcanon. This is false because Robin straight up says, "We can't fix the wall without the supplies on these trucks." They also claim it's unrealistic for materials that could reinforce walls against Grimm to be used on a satellite entering near orbit, despite the fact one would need such a thing to be shielded for safety reasons. They claim that point is unrealistic, but don't really provide any evidence, and claim us not seeing the supplies is bad because vague. I have to wonder if they expect a scientific thesis on every aspect of world building done in, say, Star Trek. They then claim that me highlighting the Grimm's strength and destruction feats to prove a wall of ice would be useless is a poor argument. Their reasoning is it's death battles like logic, insisting that anyone who has ever watched death battles would say such analysis of feats in action shows can be extremely inaccurate and inconsistent. This rather feels like putting the conclusion before the argument, given they haven't justified how it's death battles logic. By that logic, is observing any feat in media and drawing a conclusion on what characters are capable of based on those observations death battles logic? They don't say, instead saying that RWBY has no realism with physics and is inconsistent on feats because of rule of cool. Their example is that Cinder should have died due to her fall into the water in Volume 5, which rather ignores her being a magical lady fused with a Grimm and frozen at the time. I also went back and checked the fight, and while we see Cinder's aura straining, we don't actually see it shatter either, so she has that going for her too. But as to rule of cool, the writers have gone on record saying they had to rein in Monty's preferences for rule of cool, such as with him wanting Blake to cut a train in half, as they felt it would be inconsistent with the level of power they wanted her to be at. Thus, I find their argument baseless at best. Real-life example, or as I would call it, my conclusion. They claim Ted Cruz running away is realistic, but it has nothing to do with Ironwood because he did give Mantle shit support and wanted to save the world, then claiming Ironwood did not run, which is literally false. His entire plan hinged on leaving Mantle and the world to die once he got spooked by Cinder. So no, it's perfectly reasonable as a comparison. Ted Cruz is a shitty politician who does the bare minimum to meet his responsibilities, if that, and runs away when personally threatened. Ironwood is of a similar behavioural pattern, hence the comparison. I wasn't saying they are identical, just that it was a very similar situation. And that based on Ironwood's previous lack of interest in a few city blocks, that it's not unrealistic for him to have abandoned them. The thing about Ironwood is that he actually wants to be a hero, but has too many character flaws to ever be one, which is what makes him an engaging tragedy. Oh, then they go on to accuse me of demonization, claiming I am the one ignoring the show and twisting it, despite citing sources for all of my scenes when I write my videos. They then complain about how people who defend Ironwood treating Mantle like shit are cast as stand and are totally misrepresented, and that assuming political leanings because of it is rude. This is hypocritical for someone who accused me, someone who deals with bigotry in real life, of being a bigot because I reblogged 2 posts from a blog he claimed is bigoted despite refusing to present evidence the 3 times I asked. So, you know, classy. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you want to support my work, please check out my Patreon or Ko-fi, where you can also commission 3D art. Thanks for stopping by.